Hey folks, good morning. We are just going to wait a few minutes here to get some people in. I'll be moderating the session. I'm Dr. David Ruskin, conference organizer. You just heard me talk, but I'll be introducing the talks and also giving the timings on this. So welcome to the conference. So glad that everyone could make it. And again, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. All right, so welcome to the Build EXITO track. Dr. Ames, I don't know if you'd like to say just a brief introduction to what the Build EXITO track is and what the Build EXITO scholars are.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Half a day, everyone. The Build EXITO scholarship program is designed to help bring in undergraduate students into the Gateway Methods course, which is the papers that they will be presenting today. And then also into enrichment programs, which include a journal club that we run once a month. And then into REUs, so research summer programs, off island for the most part. And then into research learning communities. So they join professors who have ongoing research. They become part of that research program. They become basically research assistants. We've been a part of the class conference since 2007. And I think it's probably one of the better learning experiences that our Build scholars have. So for most of the students presenting today, it'll be the first time that they've presented in a peer-reviewed conference. So it's something that we've been working on all last semester and look very forward to presenting today. So I'd really like to thank the committee, the Art Class Conference Committee, for arranging the Build scholars to have a track this conference. I know virtually that it comes at a cost to the conference and to the conference committee. So thank you very much, and all the best to the Build scholars. And I see that you have quite a bit of support here, and I look forward to hearing your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ames, and good morning, everyone. It is great to see so many faces here. We're going to jump right in because we're already a few minutes into the first sort of block. So the first speaker that we've got here is Diana Mallanao, who is going to be talking to us about UOG's students' perspectives on climate change and how that plays out and affects things. Diana, please take it away.
Okay. Half a day. Hope you guys are doing well. As mentioned, I'm Diana, and I am a Build EXITO scholar. So last semester for the research program's Gateway course, we were given the opportunity to conduct our own research. And for my research, I decided to study UOG students' perspective and knowledge on climate change and how these affect their environmental awareness and decisions. Next slide, please. Okay. So my study's central thesis is University of Guam students' level of knowledge and stance in climate change has an influence on their environmental awareness and decisions. Next slide, please. So I came up with two hypotheses. My first hypothesis, I hypothesized that if students are knowledgeable about climate change, then they would have strong environmental awareness. And hypothesis number two, I hypothesized that if students possess a strong belief in climate change, then they would have strong environmental awareness as well. Next slide, please. So for my research question, do the stance and knowledge about climate change among University of Guam students impact their environmental awareness and decisions? Next slide, please. Okay, so for my study, I reference Myung-Ja Kim and Michael Hall's study a lot. It is titled, Can Climate Change Awareness Predict Pro-Environmental Practices in Restaurants? So for their study, they were able to apply the theory of planned behavior, which is simply the theory that links beliefs to behaviors. So this theory is basically saying that one's personal beliefs can influence the way they act, behave, and the decisions they make. So for their methods of data collection, Kim and Hall conducted an online survey consisting of 31 questions. The sample population was sampled through the quota sampling method. They also conducted a semi-structured interview with 5 PhD candidates as participants. So the data collected was analyzed through the PLS-SEM method, or the partial least square structural equational modeling method, which is the technique of data analysis commonly used to investigate cause and effect relationships. Next slide, please. Going back to my study, for my quantitative method of data collection, I conducted an online survey through Google Forms consisting of 31 questions as well. And for my qualitative method, I conducted an interview consisting of 10 questions, and I was able to interview 2 undergraduate students from the University of Guam. Each interview lasted 30 to 50 minutes long, respectively. All in all, I was able to collect data from 30 University of Guam students with ages 19 and above, male and female, and this population was sampled through convenience sampling. And for theoretical application, like Kim and Hall's study, I was also able to apply the theory of planned behavior to my study, since we are looking at UOG students' belief in climate change and their knowledge in climate change and how that would affect their environmental decisions and behaviors. So for the data collected, they were analyzed through SPSS statistics and a little bit of Microsoft Excel. Next slide, please. There are 3 major themes to my study: climate change awareness, environmental awareness, and the link between those two, climate change awareness and environmental awareness. Next slide, please. So for theme number 1, climate change awareness, I ran a central tendency data analysis through SPSS on 2 variables taken from the survey. This particular variable looks at the participants' knowledge on climate change. This was actually a Likert scale type survey item wherein participants can respond with strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree to the statement, I am knowledgeable about climate change. The reason I chose to do central tendency data analysis is so that we can determine the data's median. And for this data, the median came out to 4, which is the code for agree. Participants falling below the median were considered participants who were not as knowledgeable about climate change, so they had low knowledge, and participants who fall within and above that range were considered participants who were highly knowledgeable about climate change. Next slide, please. The second variable is, now we're looking at the participants' stance in climate change. This was actually a yes or no survey item wherein participants can respond with either yes or no to the statement, climate change is real. As you can see here, all 28 respondents responded with yes, which is why the median came out to 0. Therefore, all participants possess a strong belief in climate change, fortunately. Okay, next slide, please. So moving on to theme number 2, environmental awareness, I decided to do a frequency distribution data analysis along with the central tendency data analysis. So this variable, we are looking at the participants' environmental awareness now. You can see that out of 28 participants, 9 were neutral. Oh, this was actually a Likert scale type survey item as well, wherein students can again respond with strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree with the statement, I am environmentally aware. And as we can see here, 20 out of 28, 9 were neutral, 13 agreed that they were environmentally aware, and 6 strongly agreed that they were environmentally aware. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, so as we can see here, the median also came out to 4. So any participants who fell below that range were considered participants who had weak environmental awareness, and participants who fall within and above that range were considered participants who had strong environmental awareness. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to theme number 3, which is again the link between climate change awareness and environmental awareness. I did a cross tabulation test to 2 out of the 3 variables we just went over. So I did a cross tabulation on the participants' knowledge on climate change and how these would relate to their environmental awareness. As you can see here, 16 participants had high knowledge about climate change, and most of them were also highly environmentally aware. So next slide, please. The cross tabulation was done to test our first hypothesis. Students who are knowledgeable about climate change would have strong environmental awareness. Next slide, please. And based on the data we just looked at, we can say that this hypothesis is to be refuted, and this is because, next slide, please. There were participants who were highly knowledgeable about climate change and still did not have strong environmental awareness. And there were also participants who had low knowledge on climate change and demonstrated strong environmental awareness. So to verify this cross tabulation test result, I ran a regression test on SPSS. This just helps us determine whether the correlation is weak or strong. We are looking at the R-square value. If it is closer to 1, then that means that the correlation is strong between the 2 variables. And if it's further from 1, then the correlation is weak between the variables. So for this cross tabulation, the R-square came out to 0.143, which means that there is a correlation between the participants' knowledge on climate change and their environmental awareness, but it's not as strong as we would like it to be. Next slide, please. I also did another cross tabulation, but this time for the participants' stance in climate change and how that relates on their environmental awareness. There's not much to look at here since all of them possessed a strong belief in climate change. So next slide, please. That cross tabulation was done to test our second hypothesis. Students who possess a strong belief in climate change would have strong environmental awareness. Next slide, please. Now, based on the data we just looked at, we can say that the hypothesis number 2 is to be refuted as well. And this is because, next slide, please. This is because although all of them had believed that climate change is real, 9 were still not as environmentally aware as the rest. And that is why we refuted our second hypothesis. Next, please. I also ran a regression test on Microsoft Excel, and the R-square value came out to this small number here, which conveys a significantly weak correlation between the participants' stance on climate change and their environmental awareness. Next slide, please. So I went through my interview data to see, and I saw that some information there gave me insight and a possible explanation as to why two of my hypotheses were refuted. And it's that some people's environmental awareness and decisions would show little to no progress after becoming more aware about climate change. And this is because they're not directly or severely affected by climate change yet, or they just don't care enough to do better. And sadly, it is true. In my experience, personally speaking, I do know a great deal about climate change. I see how real it is. I see how it affects the world, even in our island community, in our daily lives as well. But there are times where I could not care enough to do better, where I would choose convenience over sustainability and for the greater good of our environment. And that is one habit and mindset that I am working on eliminating in my everyday life. Hopefully you guys are too. Okay, so next slide, please. For further research, I would encourage researchers to go for a more diverse sample population. Instead of limiting the population to University of Guam students, I would open it up to the Guam population, people from different Guam villages, communities, age groups. I would also consider conducting study in other universities just so that there would be a base of comparison with my data. And I recommend interviewing a professional. I find that it really helps with your data and for verifying your quantitative data. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, therefore I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and for giving me the opportunity to share with you guys my research. Once again, thank you and Viva Meshamoro.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diana. All right, so we have some time for questions. We did start a little bit late and we had 2 delays. And so what I'm going to do here is to give us slightly more time, but we've got at least according to the schedule, like 7 minutes still. So let's start with that and see where that takes us. Questions from the floor. All right, well, while we are waiting for people to do this, and there might be some that jump in on chat, I do have a question. So I guess these are factors that are more about the outcomes and sort of going from here. What do you, there were some students you said who like don't care to do better. What do you think are factors there? Do you think is it a sense of hopelessness? Is it sort of like a small changes versus large polluters, or is it more of a like, I don't know, just more focusing on their own choices rather than global choices?
I am not too sure, but I would speak from my own experience. Like I said, I would choose convenience over sustainability. I feel like it would be easier, like in our everyday lives, to just go with whatever is easy instead of going the extra mile to do what is good for the environment and for everyone else. So I feel like convenience is definitely one of the major reasons as to why people, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, we've got some questions in the chat here. First one here from Rochelle Alviz. What was your conclusion based on the public opinion?
Yes, in a way, I based my conclusion based on my data results. So whatever I shared with you guys, that's where my conclusion came from.
Yeah, I think if Rochelle, if there was something more specific you were asking there, you can put that as a follow-up. We've got Anisha Malin Ignacio here. When looking at the data you collected, were you surprised at the results, or did you expect this?
I would say I was surprised at first, but then I looked at myself and I was like, if I do this, is that, like, it's not something I would be surprised if I'm looking at myself. So I'm like, maybe I should not expect it out of others if I can't do it myself as well. So
I'm still not. The question was from Marie. Given your findings, what are your recommendations that students do to maybe improve their environmental awareness, or to increase this correlation between climate change knowledge and environmental awareness?
So based on my study, I found that just having, like, being knowledgeable about the subject and believing that the subject is real, it's not sufficient to increase environmental awareness. So what I would recommend is, it's more of like a community effort. Maybe have local businesses promote environmental awareness, such as like removing the use of one-use plastic, or like, yeah, like the implementation of environmental awareness decisions, and maybe implement that, as well as like the government can also implement environmental awareness policies that could maybe hopefully would boost Guam, like the community's environmental awareness as a whole, if that makes sense.
Great. Questions here from Liana. And I think I had a question about this as well. So her question is sort of a little direct here. But I have a follow-up. Do you think other types of stats might affect your findings? I don't know if this refers to a particular type of result, but I did want to ask about your second hypothesis and result. And Liana can also jump in if there were different stats that she wanted to talk about. Your second result was looking for this correlation between belief in climate change and what was the other one? Environmental awareness, right? And you had 100% belief, I think, if I remember correctly. And so you said, well, we refute this hypothesis, but that was more of a, you really can't tell from the data, because you're sort of dealing with, if there's belief off the scale, this is like censored data and so forth. Do you think maybe there was a different way that you could look at that would have changed the sort of your interpretation of that hypothesis? Liana saying also yes, how the median turned out. So that might also sort of be related to that same question.
Now that you guys are bringing that up, I realize how I could look at the data differently. Sorry, the question was, do you think that there are types of... Yes,
broadly, I guess it was, do you think there are other stats that you could run that might have showed the data, I guess, in a little bit of a different light?
Yes, I feel like it would affect my findings. It's also something I should improve on. I feel like instead of using a yes or no statement for or yes or no survey item, I could have used a Likert scale type, so that it would have been easier to analyze, like the first one with the participants' climate change knowledge. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Liana. It is 10:30. We have the next talk. We did start a few minutes late, so if there's another question, happy to take one more in the chat.
I have a question for
Dr. Ames, please go ahead.
Yeah. Based on the other questions that you've gotten after your presentation, which you did a wonderful job, a very good job at presenting your data, right? and your paper was very good as well. I think that you have a very a very good explanation as to why why those that you interviewed for your project, there wasn't as strong a correlation between climate change awareness and environmental awareness. So I wanted to ask you how was it that your interview data helped you explain or substantiate some of your quantitative findings? How did you use that interview data to help explain some of those quantitative findings?
So for my interview questions, there were some questions that were actually very similar to my survey questions. So I kind of formatted it in a way that I would get a quantitative data out of that survey questions that I gave out. And for my interview, I also formatted the similar questions in a way that I can have more in-depth explanation, if that makes sense. And I used the interviewee's response to substantiate my quantitative data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Good presentation. And
Yeah.
congratulations on collecting data during COVID. It's been, quite a challenge for everyone. Yeah.
Also true. Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Ames. I think any of us who've been doing research projects the past 2 years have just been have been way slower than typical. So fantastic job. Thank you so much. All right, we are going to switch to the next talk. So next up, we've got Nico Valencia from Hagat. Nico is a biomed major and a representative for the Guam Youth Congress, recently appointed a representative to the Thrive Coalition to help youth combat substance use disorders. Nico hopes to pursue research in substance use disorders in the future. So I will now turn this over. Nico will be talking about how Chamorro cultural identity intersects with trust of or use of Suruhanu and Suruhana, the traditional medicinal and spiritual healers on the islands. Take it away, Nico.
Today, before I go any further, am I able to be heard good? Okay, just making sure. So half day everyone, again, I'm Nico Valencia. I'm a part of UOG Build EXITO's cohort 6. And today I will be presenting on identification with Chamorro culture and the correlation of that data with faith in the Zomtisi. Next slide, please. So before I go any further, it's important to note that the term Zomti or Zomtisiha as the plural is sort of interchangeable with the term for Suruhana. It's just that when I was talking to these individuals, they preferred the term Zomti because it refers to more so beneficial healing practices and not the sort of witchcraft that Suruhana entails. And the purpose of this study was to continue to understand patient trends with the Zomtisiha, so to say, reasons or correlations for why people go to the Zomtisiha. And the research question posed was, is there a relationship between accepting Chamorro culture and comfort with the continued practice of the Zomtisiha? Next slide, please. For the thesis, I have that adults on Guam who accept Chamorro culture are more likely to be open to the practices of the Zomtisiha. And the hypotheses I have are basically a positive and a negative correlation hypothesis. The positive correlation being that large belief in Chamorro culture correlates with large faith or trust in the Zomtisiha, and the negative correlation being that belief in Chamorro culture correlates with faith in the Zomti. Next slide, please. For the sociology theory supporting my hypothesis, I have that I have social learning theory, basically saying that people can learn through observation that may or may not be acted upon later, but is reinforced somehow during learning. In this instance, we're looking at people from Guam who, as a result, were raised around Chamorro culture, and as a result, that leads to increased faith in the Zomti. Next slide, please. For the literature review, there wasn't much in terms of qualitative analysis, but there was a lot of analyses of surveys. In this set of data we have here, we can see that people who went as children tended to go at a lower rate than when they were adults. However, despite that, out of all respondents who did take the survey, 46% of them did claim to bring their children to the Zomti when they had a respiratory ailment or other physiological or spiritual concern. And then the last point from the literature review was that Chamorros went to the Zomti at a higher rate than other individuals. Next slide, please. The methods of data analysis for this study were qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative was a semi-standard interview conducted with one medical doctor and anesthesiologist, which basically asked them their opinions on the Zomti and what place that the Zomti do have in modern medicine or in spiritual or healing concerns. The quantitative end was a 31-question survey, and 43 in total were conducted. However, only 29 of the total surveys could be used due to the fact that certain individuals didn't fit the criteria that was requested. That being that they had to be over 19, or the fact that I used being from Guam or living in Guam as a catch-all to identify people who are familiar with Chamorro culture and the Zomti. And those individuals who didn't fit that were cut out from the analysis. In terms of analyzing data, every set of data was combined together and averaged out. Though from that, every set of data was averaged out and then rounded to the nearest whole number. So if I had a 4.6 for faith in Chamorro culture, that would then be rounded up to 5.0. The sampling design used was convenience sampling and snowball sampling. And in terms of ethical concerns, there was a concern of respecting the culture, IRB acceptance letters being given after the distribution of the survey. However, despite this, they were still, any participant who did take the survey, whether or not they were used in data analysis, they were emailed a copy of the IRB acceptance letter. And in terms of confidentiality, that was entirely ensured for everyone involved. Next slide, please. So the interview with the medical doctor revealed three main points. The first point being that a very specific demographic goes to the Zomti, and there is no indication of decrease or increase in participation to that practice. The second point being that while modern medicine isn't directly threatening the practice, it has been scrutinized, so to say, more so by the scientific rigor of modern science, thus leading people to trust it more. And in another sense, they said that traditional medicine cannot offer what modern medicine provides. And the third point is that the practice has a place in healing the overall person. Now, that last point I said about traditional medicine offering up modern medicine can, the same goes the other way. So we can see the fact that while an anesthesiologist might not be able to provide certain measures to helping the person, the Zomti might be able to provide those measures which do help the person. Next slide, please. For the themes, I have 4 general themes. The first theme being the sort of overarching theme that is correlated with everything else, identification with Chamorro culture, which is correlated with comfort in the Zomti overall, belief that the Zomti help more than medical doctors for culture, religious, or spiritual reasons, and belief that the Zomti help heal the person physiologically. Next slide, please. Here we can see themes 1 and 2, or the frequency of the Likert scale that was created for them. Again, the Likert scale, it was a 1 to 5 ranking, going from 1 to 5, strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. And here we can see in the first theme that 85% of individuals either agreed or strongly agreed with the fact that they do identify with Chamorro culture. And looking at comfort with the ZOMT overall, before I go any further, comfort with the ZOMT overall refers to the combinations of themes 3 and 4, which is culture, religions, and spiritual reasons, meshed together with helping for physiological reasons. And analyzing this data, we can see that almost 80% of individuals either agreed or strongly agreed with the fact that they are comfortable with the ZOMT. Next slide, please. And here we can see the correlation between themes 1 and 2. We can see our Pearson correlation, or R value, is positive and approaching 1, but it is a weak positive correlation. And our significance, or p-value, is 0.438, which indicates lack of statistical significance. Next slide, please. For our third theme, we can see belief that the ZOMT help more with culture, religious, and spiritual reasons. And we can see, again, almost 80% of individuals either agreed or strongly agreed with the fact that they do, in fact, do this. When we look down at the correlations between themes 1 and 3, we can see a weak positive correlation in the 0.072 and a showing of statistical insignificance in the 0.710. Next slide, please. For our fourth theme, we can see the belief that the ZOMT help with physiological concerns. And here we can see that people were mostly torn in the fact that 51.7% of all individuals neither agreed nor disagreed with the fact that they did do this. And 20.7% of individuals stated that they disagreed with this fact. When we correlate this data with theme 1 again, we can see a R value of 0.185 and a p-value of 0.337, showing a weak positive correlation, but a lack of statistical significance. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the data collected does not support my hypothesis. All sets of data showed weak positive correlation and lack of statistical significance. However, there was another set of data I wanted to analyze and include, but due to time constraints, I wasn't able to. And it was the idea that people prefer the ZOMT for religious, culture, and spiritual reasons, and medical doctors for physiological treatment. And in that sense, the data did reveal that fact. So that was there. For improvements to the study, a larger sample size would be greatly appreciated. And the other improvement could be getting multiple perspectives from different ZOMT. Each village sort of has their own ZOMT that has a different way of practicing the medicine. One might make talismans, one might do the massaging, one might make omelet. So seeing how people trust each one, or each individual practice at least, would be very interesting and would help contribute to the study. And the last improvement, which sort of ties into future research, is getting perspectives from individuals who don't accept Chamorro culture. Almost all individuals who did take the survey, except for one individual, stated that they were comfortable with Chamorro culture. So seeing a body of 30 individuals who do identify and 30 individuals who don't identify would help understand the data further. For future research, we could get into more explanations as to why people do go to the ZOMT. One common point that was regularly brought up after presentation and in conversation with people about this topic was that age plays a large role. We usually think of the Manamku as the ones who do go to the ZOMT at a higher rate. So studying that fact would probably yield more beneficial data. Next slide, please. Beyond that, that's all I have. Thank you for listening. I do hope you have some questions for me.
All right, thank you very much, Nico. All right, hold on one moment. Let me switch back to seeing everybody here. There we go. All right, fantastic. All right, so plop those questions into the chat if you've got them, folks, and we'll relate them. While we are waiting for those, I have sort of a more general question for you, and I don't know if you have an insight into this. For a project that I'm doing, we were sitting down, we were interviewing a Chamorro elder, and they were the daughter of Surahana. And the association with witchcraft or voodoo was something she found very sort of vexing. She's like, where does this come from? Why does everyone sort of associate it that way? And especially because so much of the practice is massage, traditional medicine, the amot is a central part of this. Do you have a feeling as to where these associations of witchcraft come from?
I remember reading about that, and I believe the origins of so before Surahana, because that's a Spanish word, it was Zomti. So when it was Surahana, that sort of became the catch-all for everyone that sort of practiced the medicine. So I guess it just got associated that those who do practice witchcraft were also the individuals who did healing, even though they might have been different bodies.
So it might have been partially a colonial imposition of sort of a, I see. Okay, thank you, that's helpful. We've got a question here from Paul Lozano. Hello, Nico. I would be interested to find out what are the perspectives of those that have gone to the Zomti houses in Tumon, Zagan Koturan Chamorro, and in Zotnya. Is that something that you could look into for further consideration?
Yeah, I think any research further into reasons as to why people go to the Zomti would be greatly appreciated, because it would also help with understanding a way of helping to perpetuate that practice of Chamorro culture. So yes.
We got one from Nolan Flores here. Did you measure or consider measuring individuals' ability to see or access Zomti?
That point was considered. However, one of the questions I asked was, it's been a while, there's so many questions, 31 total. But it basically didn't ask that, no. I asked individuals if they've ever gone to a Zomti, and I believe only like 2 individuals out of the 30 who took the survey said they have gone to one. So in terms of that specific question, no, I did not.
Yeah, I get the overall sense that it's increasingly endangered practice, just because very few individuals seem to want to like learn it from their parents or continue on the practice. Where do you see this heading in the future, in the coming years?
I, as an individual, I'm not so sure, but based on the interview I had with a medical doctor, they stated that it will just have a stagnant sort of level of participation or patients. So I have faith that it'll be that or increase in the future.
Yeah. We've got a question here from Barbara Beneventi. What was the average age of your survey respondents?
The average age was mostly like 19 years old to about 50 to 60 years old. So I guess when you take the average of that, about 30, 40 was the average.
Now, I have a question for you, Nico. So you were using social learning theory, right? With regards to explaining your data. And in your conclusion, you talked about looking at the Zumamati with regards to culture, religion, excuse me, and spiritual concerns versus the medical doctors more for that, physical concerns. How did you apply social learning theory to that conclusion?
In terms of that separate idea, that wasn't one directly considered. That was just an afterthought of just looking at the data and just realizing, oh, people trust this body for this and this body for that. But I haven't thought of that right as of yet.
Yeah, I think with your future research, because I know you're very interested in this topic, and you did a really good paper and a very good presentation. With regards to your future research, it would be interesting to look at that social learning with regards to the separation. Even though your average age was 40, you might want to think with regards to why even the older generations are, there's some evidence in your data that even the older generations are looking at it from two different perspectives. Yeah, good job. Congratulations, Nico.
Thank you.
Since we have some time here, actually, let me sort of ask a follow-up question about, you sort of mentioned future studies, but I'd just like to probe that a little bit more. Now that you've done the study, now that you've seen these results, if you could do it again, or if you could sort of like, what would you, how might you change the study in a different version, or what would be your like optimal data set? If there was something where you could like really get some data, even if it were difficult to collect, what would that look like? Or what would be your like, best study?
I think in terms of best study, I would consider age more so. Even right now, we're discussing how age is a big correlation between participation and the individual. So I think I'd include that instead of identification with more culture.
It's certainly related terms, right? Is there any way to like disentangle that?
To disentangle.
Well, the adherence to sort of like, so going to Zomti was associated with older individuals, but also with a sort of like stronger traditional practices. It feels like there's sort of a conflation in some degree there. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. There is a question for Liana here. Sorry, I don't know.
Interesting thought. Interesting thought.
Maybe we'll move on from that. Maybe I'm not seeing the entire data set, so I think maybe. Question for Liana. I know this is part of your themes, but did you hypothesize seeing Zomti for physiological concerns?
Yes, I did hypothesize that, but that was, I didn't want to consider or just separate the data set to saying physiological doesn't relate to your mental sort of situation. I think that they do directly entail one another. So that was lumped in together, considering trust in the Zomti overall.
We do have one more question here from Barbara Beneventi. Was a question asked about preference for male or female Zomti?
No, that question was not asked in the survey.
Do you think that would have an effect? I mean, can you like postulate on this?
When I was talking to other Zomti, I saw that there was a larger body of females who continue to practice it. So maybe that would be a factor to consider, or something that would be involved in the formulation of that data.
A sort of follow-up question for the question asker, for Barbara Beneventi. Is this question asking preference in terms of those who go to Zomti, or is this a question about preference of the Zomti themselves, of the practicing healer? I think rereading the question. Never mind. I think rereading the question. It was. Nico, did you just answer the question in terms of the sort of gender of people who tend to go to Zomti? Because I think the question was asking about, is there preference for male or female healers?
Yeah. So I answered it in terms of preference for a male or female.
Oh, you did. Okay, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your response.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. We just have just a few more minutes. I think if that's it, let's thank our speaker. Thank you, Nico, so much. And we'll give a moment or two to sort of switch talks and get set up for Alessandra. We aren't going to start early on the next one. We will start at 11 just in case people are switching tracks to keep things aligned. But that'll give us a moment to grab a drink of water or what have you. While we're switching over, Dr. Ames, I'd just like to thank you again for another impressive group of Build EXITO scholars. This has been a program which has been, I feel, very important to the community of UOG scholars, and also just really nice to see these research projects coming out of UOG, seeing young scholarship.
Thanks, Dr. Ruskin. I want to thank you also. Thanks, Dr. Ames. She's our superstar faculty here on Build. But I really want to thank you because I really do appreciate this. And we have an annual report due to Portland State. So this is one event that we always highlight. So thanks so much. I appreciate it.
And just for the audience, just recognizing Dean Dr. Margaret Hattori-Uchima. So thank you as well, School of Health. All right, we've got 1 minute here. Let's get set up with Alessandra. Let's just start we'll start the introduction. That way we can start you at sort of at the hour mark. All right, so up next, we've got Alessandra Cuevas. Alessandra is a sophomore majoring in biomed, and the other part of the bio that she provided me is that she's also a Build EXITO scholar, which I guess is at this point obvious to us, but that's fantastic. Thanks for being part of the project or the program. Today, Alessandra is going to be talking with us about how social media impacts young adults, particularly aspects of things like negative news and negative valence things. Social media having such a large impact on younger people's lives that this is a deep and current issue. So it's 11 o'clock. I'm going to hand it over to you, Alessandra. Please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Again, I'm Alessandra, and I will be presenting on negative news and its impact on Guam's young adults. Next slide, please. So a little background on my research. Negative news is extremely common in the modern world, as we all know, considering that young adults comprise the majority of users of social media apps. Encounters with negative news is inevitable, which then leaves an impact on young adults. This research aims to determine the specific impacts negative news on social media apps have on Guam's young adults. Next slide, please. So the themes and categories that my research focused on were social media apps, news on social media, and attitude toward negative news. Next slide, please. So my research questions were, what impacts do negative news have on Guam's young adults aged 19 to 30? And does having more social media sources increase the chances of being impacted? My thesis statement was negative news, specifically natural disasters, crimes, and social issues viewed on social media leave a negative impact on young adults due to frequent encounters. With more social media apps, one is more negatively impacted by negative news. Next slide, please. So here are my hypotheses. So first, I hypothesized that young adults who use social media apps, regardless of the number of apps that they use, are more likely to encounter negative news than positive news. For my second hypothesis, I hypothesized that young adults who use more social media apps will experience anger, fear, and/or sadness compared to those who use fewer social media apps. Next slide, please. So an article for my literature review focused on negative news on social media and its effects on emotional and cognitive responses. So this research was similar to my research, as both of our studies study the effects negative news on social media has on individuals. Although for this article, this research, they specifically used Twitter, the app Twitter, and they evaluated the emotions anger, fear, and disgust. This research mentioned a theory that was beneficial to my study. So I put it here, it's a negativity bias. They define it as the phenomenon whereby humans tend to put more emphasis on negative information than on positive information. Next slide, please. So the methods that I used for qualitative research, I conducted semi-standardized interviews comprised of 10 questions. I interviewed undergraduates at the University of Guam. One was a nursing major and the other was a communications major. So I kind of chose individuals who majored in different studies just to compare the responses. As you know, one who is more exposed, as we assume communications major, we would assume that he or she would be more exposed to the media, and then one who is less exposed, which is the nursing major. And then for quantitative research, I also conducted empirical surveys comprised of 25 closed-ended questions, and I was able to gather 26 respondents from young adults aged 19 to 30. For my sample design, I used convenience sampling and referral sampling, specifically snowball sampling. And then regarding ethical concerns, all data that were collected were kept confidential. Cover letters, consent forms, and debriefing statements were given to participants. And this research was approved by the Institutional Review Board of the university. Next slide, please. So for techniques of data analysis, I use the statistical package for the social sciences, or the SPSS. I use central tendencies, frequency distributions, and cross-tabulations. For the variables, the independent variable was the number of apps used, and for dependent variables, they were negative news encounters and attitude or emotions toward negative news, specifically anger, fear, and sadness. If you recall earlier, the article from the literature review used anger, fear, and disgust, but I didn't want to focus on disgust, so I put in sadness instead. Next slide, please. So the interview results from the 20-year-old nursing major, she mentioned that she uses a total of 5 apps and encounters negative news almost every day. Of all the 3 types of negative news, natural disasters, crimes, and social issues, she said that social issues affected her most. And then when asked about her attitude toward negative news, she said that she feels angry and sad toward negative news and believes that if news relates to an individual, then he or she is more likely to feel the aforementioned emotions. As for the 19-year-old communications major, she said that she uses a total of 2 apps and that she encounters negative news every day as well. And when asked about the 3 emotions, anger, fear, and sadness, she didn't really specify any of the emotions, but she did say that she chooses how to react before going forward. She said that she was proactive when reading negative news. Next slide, please. So for the central tendency, for the numbers of apps used, the median came out to 3.5, so in between 3 and 4 apps. Next slide, please. So for the frequency distribution, the types of news encounter, 92.3%, so majority of the participants said that they encounter negative news more than positive news. Next slide, please. So we can see here on the left side, I use the Likert scale, which is a 5 to 7 point scale to rate their responses from strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree, although we did not focus on strongly disagree and disagree, as well as neutral, as they don't really provide any interpretations or answers to this study. So focusing on agree and strongly agree, 50% of the participants said that they are likely to press on a negative headline, and this is supported by the theory negativity bias. Next slide, please. So for this slide, it's shown that 34.6% of participants either agree or strongly agree. When asked of the likelihood of reading a negative news article. And again, this is supported by the negativity bias theory. Next slide, please. So for the cross tabulations, relationships between the variables were shown. So in terms of anger, 42.3% of individuals mentioned that they feel angry toward negative news. Next slide, please. And then in terms of fear, 53.8%, so a little over half of the participants said that they feel fearful toward negative news. And then next slide, please. For sadness, 69.2% of participants mentioned that they feel sad toward negative news. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, my first hypothesis was supported regardless of the number of apps used. Participants, majority of them, 92.3% of participants and individuals interviewed stated that they encounter negative news more than positive news. Although my second hypothesis was not supported, majority of participants with a low number of apps, which is lower than median, use were shown to feel angry, fearful, and sad toward negative news. Again, my second hypothesis stated that more apps means that they're more likely affected, but the results showed otherwise, as majority of participants, again, with the low number of apps were affected. 50% of participants are likely to press on a negative headline, and this again was supported by the negativity bias theory. Next slide, please. So for future research, I could expand, if I were to do this again, I would expand the age of sample group. Although I mentioned that the age group was between 19 and 30, the data that I gathered were more from the early 20s, the individuals who were in the early 20s. And I could also evaluate other emotions and attitudes in addition to anger, fear, and sadness. And I could also include other types of negative news, not just natural disasters, social issues, and crimes. Next slide, please. My bibliography, next slide, please. Okay, thank you everyone for listening. That concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Alessandra. That was a quick one. All right, so we've got 20 minutes for questions. Let's open that up to the floor again. Plop these down into the chat, and we'll relate them as we get them in. I will take while we're doing that, I'll take the opportunity as moderator to ask a question. So moderator's choice here. So I might have missed this just at the beginning, or perhaps something along those lines. So overall, you said people have encountered more negative news than positive news on social media or on these apps. Do you have a baseline from like the general news stream? What is the overall balance between negative news, positive news? It feels like, I mean, not just feels like, it's well known that news is biased towards sort of negative events for a number of psychological reasons. But do you think that the social media apps are presenting a balance that is biased away from that baseline, sort of overall? Like, is it still negative but more positive than general, or do you have a feel for that?
I would say that the media focuses more on negative news. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but
not quite. No, I mean, we know that the media focuses on negative news, but in terms of social media apps, do you think that that's reflective of like the overall sort of like just news in general, that news in general is kind of negative? Or is it that social media apps are like, we're going to focus just on the more terrible things and so forth? Or we could hypothesize the opposite, is that maybe on social media people are like, all right, here's some news to just because it's current events, but also here's some really fun things, here's some exciting things, here's some like great positive news stories, and it's a different balance than if you were just like checking a news app rather than social media.
Yeah, I think social media, like what you said, puts up more negative news.
Huh.
And I mean, although there is some positive news, I think it's geared towards more negativity. And I guess it's like because it gains more attention. Yeah.
I see. So it's sort of a snowballing type of effect, that because it's social media works on these sorts of like upvotes and so forth. That's the
Mhm.
sort of stuff that goes on. Interesting. We've got a question here from Rochelle. Great job, Alessandra. Do you think results may have been different depending on the news outlet that was being posted on social media? For example, CNN, New York Times, and so forth.
Yes, for sure. I think it would be different. Like for instance, a news outlet like CNN, like you said, would probably cover more, of course, current events, but more negative news, I guess, because what's happening in the world today, more negative, right? Like that kind of outlet wouldn't post positive news like, oh, this celebrity gave birth, congrats. So of course, depending on the news outlet, it would be different.
Yeah, definitely some doom and gloom in certain publications. If it bleeds, it leads is the news whatever mantra. Okay, while we're waiting for additional questions, I actually have an additional one. Or Dr. Ames, I saw you unmuting there. If you want to jump in, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good presentation, Alexandra, and a very good paper. It's one of the first times that I've seen this topic. And I was really curious what got you started, and why is it that you picked this topic, and what interests you most about your research findings?
Well, I wanted to do this because it's more common now, like with everything happening, we see a lot of negative news. And I think like this study would also help individuals like myself, the younger generation, to be more attentive to like current events. And I also wanted to study like if it's really negative news that dominate like social media. I mean, I would say it is, but is it because it's really what's happening, or it's what people choose to, put up, or if that's what they choose to read or see on their social media?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's what your negativity bias theory is saying. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got some other ones in the chat here. Dean, Dr. Margaret Aubrie Uson is asking, sorry, I might have missed it here, but did they also tell you what the apps were? Actually, this was the question I was going to follow up with, but the same question here. Wondering what the most common apps were. I think to expand on that question, definitely has some sort of impact. I mean, the amount of news shared is probably different on different apps. Did you look at that at all?
Yes, actually, I did ask them what apps they use most, and majorities, the top three, if I remember correctly, were Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
And what sort of trends did you see across those?
Well, the results didn't really like make a difference regarding the apps. They were just like consistent throughout, like regardless of the app. Yeah. It was
So there was not more like news on Facebook than Instagram or something like that, or?
Yeah, no.
No, that surprises me, because I would assume like, so what do you count as social media? Like, here's actually a broader question. What counts as social media for you? Like, is Twitter social media? Is like Tinder social media? I mean, it's a social app, but is that social media?
Basically anything that people can post, stuff like news, their pictures, I guess, Instagram, their opinions.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. So I'm very surprised by that. The different apps didn't really have a different balance of news, which also seems to be Nico's question here, which was sort of along the same lines. Do certain apps have a preference for certain types of news? Actually, I guess that's a slightly different question. Do certain apps have a preference for different types of news?
For my study, I didn't really see that, no. But I would, if I were to study on another level, maybe I could see that, but my results didn't really show any preference for certain types of news for certain apps.
We got some more ones here in the comments and the questions. We got a comment, I guess, from Dr. Aubrie Uson. I find my social media apps very uplifting. Facebook, Instagram. Wonder if maybe it's generational. A question here from Rindraty Barreto. Hi, Alessandra. I was wondering, were any survey questions asked about how much time participants spend on social media apps? Or do you think that factor would have had any effect on your results? You asked mostly number of apps, right?
Yes, I focused on the number of apps.
So in terms of time then, did you ask anything about how much time they spend on those apps?
I believe I asked one question in the survey, like how often do you use it, like once or twice a day, but not specifically like, hours, your screen time. And she asked that factor would have any effect. I would say, yeah. That factor, the time, would have an effect on my results, but I didn't really focus on time, more on like the number of apps. Yeah, another study could, if I were to do it, I could probably focus on time.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting bit of data there. Like if someone spends like 2 hours on social media a day versus like 9 hours of social media, a day, that's a big difference in degree of exposure, if nothing else. Question here from Diana. Hi, Alessandra, awesome study. Just wondering, but how do you think your findings may benefit your research population?
So again, I was targeting young adults like myself. This research could help us, be aware of like, again, current events, but at the same time, like, how I evaluated the different emotions, the effects of negative news. This study could probably help individuals see that it's great to be aware, but also take some time out from negative news, because you could be like severely affected by these news, especially if it's like one you could relate to. Yeah.
Cool, very nice. While we're waiting for additional questions in the chat, can I actually ask a question that I'm a little bit embarrassed to ask because I missed this in your talk. I was running to the restroom and come back. What is the negativity theory? Just can you recap that briefly? Because you were talking about it, and I'm like, I don't know what that is.
The negativity bias theory.
Yes, that one. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a phenomenon like, where people tend to focus more on negativity than positivity, because I guess negativity affects us more. So I guess there's more emphasis on negativity.
When you say affects us more, is this just a like sort of emotional reaction type of thing? That what do you mean by that? Can you clarify that slightly for me?
Yeah, I would say it's more an emotional effect. Like if we see something negative and it's something that affects us negatively and makes us feel kind of down, we tend to put more emphasis on that, if that makes sense.
Do you have I have some thoughts on maybe why, but I'm sort of curious as to your thoughts on this. Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think's driving that effect? Like, why do you think the negative events are more relevant to us or more poignant to us than positive events?
I would say not that we like it, but more of like, I don't know another word to describe it, but I would say survival. Because like if we're more aware of it, then it's something that we can avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think I agree with you on that. I think that's what it's got to be. There's some sort of like yeah, survivability bias that when we see these examples of negative things, part of us is like, all right, I know to avoid those in the future. It helps us to like predict how we can survive a little bit better. Like when we see happy events, it doesn't really provide us that same sort of survival benefit. There's a puppy. It's like, well, it's nice, but that's not going to help me not fall off a cliff. I don't know if that's it though. I mean, that's my like, you know, armchair cognitive scientist view. But yeah, I think you're spot on that. I think that's a really good insight. We have a few more minutes for questions, folks, about 7 more minutes. Dr. Toriuchima, please jump in.
Oh, thanks so much, Dr. Ruskin. Alessandra, great. And of course, I'm a big fan of Dr. Ames because these are beginning, you know, research students. And I just think the work is excellent. But anyway, so Alessandra, I think this is great, especially in light of the pandemic when, you know, I really think the social media usage has increased, but, you know, you're bringing to light the negativity bias theory, I think is really relevant. And I see our Jonas Macapinlac is here, our director of integrated marketing, which I think is important. And I know I put it in the chat, but gosh, you know, one thing that's come up as far as self-care and the pandemic is really, you know, a recommendation that people, you know, limit the amount of time they listen to the news. You know, early on in the pandemic, right, a lot of people were just watching all the, you know, terrible news about COVID. And one of the great suggestions was to just limit how much time you spend watching the news every day. But the use of social media, like for me, Facebook and Instagram, I love it. To me, it's very uplifting. You know, I love seeing people's pictures of their kids or their dogs or, you know, what they're doing. So I wonder if it's generational because to me, I associate Facebook and Instagram with very positive feelings, but I know that's not true in every age group because, you know, we hear the horror stories of people being bullied, young children and teenagers and college kids being bullied on social media, leading to depression, suicide, all of that. So do you have any thoughts on that? If it's, you know, generational or?
I would say it's more like what we choose to follow. Like for instance, on Instagram, if we follow news pages, then of course we're gonna see more negative news. Even on Facebook, if we like the pages of PDN, the Guam Daily Post, then of course we're gonna see more of that. But if we choose not to, you know, like those pages or follow those pages, then of course we're gonna encounter more, you know, more of our families posts, our friends, more positivity. Yeah.
Oh, good point. Excellent. Great job.
Thank you.
Got a few additional questions here in the chat. One from Liana Santos. In terms of future research, would you consider other aspects of social media aside from news? Where do you intend to go from here?
I could consider other aspects like maybe types of content posted. You know, like there's so many contents on social media now, not just news. So maybe I could look into that.
This was a question from Nation Bolin Ignacio here. Sorry. Do you think, this is sort of basically recapping your major finding, it sounds like, do you think the number of apps an individual uses is a factor in how big an impact the news has on them? Can you, I think, just, you know, recap your major finding there for us?
Based on my findings, no. It didn't matter like the number of apps that an individual uses. They were still affected, but in terms of like the impact, I guess emotional impact the news has on them, I guess it's a matter of the severity of the news, not more in the number of apps, if that's what you're asking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the question. To follow up on Dr. Hattori Uchima's question here, do you have suggestions to people sort of broadly about how to curate maybe your social media feeds in order to have more of a positive bias, or are there ways to sort of avoid some of this negativity that you can offer as a public service announcement?
I would suggest like follow credible news sources, because there's a lot of, fake pages that just want attention and clout. So follow credible news sources that produce actual news, not those fake pages that, put out fake news, negative fake news, just so, they gain likes, views, like that. And limit your time on social media. It's good to be aware, but don't go on social media like 24/7. It's bad for you.
I think that's a fantastic take home and excellent advice. The fake news problem is a big one. Part of the issue there is that sometimes it's difficult to tell, and that's sort of an increasing challenge. Is how do we separate what's reliable news from fake news? So a big challenge. It's not always as easy just as avoiding it. Anyway, again, thank you so much. Fantastic job, especially fantastic job in fielding almost twice as many questions as you had talk, so, or twice as long. So great job there. We do have time. If there's one more, we have time for a very short question. Otherwise, let's just thank our speaker again. Thank you, Alessandra, so much. There are some other talks that you guys can go see, but thank you so much, everyone, for attending the morning Build EXITO session. And we will continue this afternoon with the following 2 Build EXITO talks. Just like to thank again the faculty sponsors on this, and thank the university for their time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Ruskin.
Great. And welcome back once again to the 43rd Annual Research Conference. As a reminder, today's conference presentations have been divided into 3 tracks, with presentations going on simultaneously. Before, once I roll through some of the reminders, we will be sharing the schedule on screen, and you can select which track you'd like to join. If you haven't pre-selected a track, you'll be able to select your track once the breakout rooms open. And if you require assistance moving into those breakout rooms, please feel free to reach out to the Global Learning and Engagement team. They'll be here in chat, so you can just go ahead and message what track you'd like to join. If you have any issues, they will remain in the main meeting room for the duration of the conference. And as a reminder, of course, as the presentations are going, start thinking of those questions for presenters in the chat, interact with them, share your reactions to what they may be saying with the little emoji buttons. Yeah, that is pretty much all I have to share with you guys. I'm looking forward to our remaining presentations for this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy your afternoon sessions.
Welcome everybody here to the continuation of the class academic research conference. This has been a really nice conference so far. Hopefully we enjoyed some of the morning sessions if we were able to get to some of them. Just really so interesting listening to all of these wonderful panels and realizing what a unique place and situation the University of Guam is in. And so such interesting work here, oftentimes having to do with our island and the region here, and just so unique in relationship to other universities stateside and around the world. I think this is just a lovely opportunity to embrace some of those interests that look at our own surroundings here, both socially and environmentally. And so with that being said, let's continue on. We have 20 minutes here for our next presentation. I will give you a heads up when there is about 5 minutes left, and then we will move into a question and answer phase of about 5 to 10 minutes. We have a slot in the middle here starting at 2:30 that will be vacant. And so we have plenty of time here if we go a little bit long or if we have a conversation at the end. I encourage the audience to write comments in the chat or ask questions in the chat, either to each other or to myself, or directed towards the moderator, and I will ask those questions, or towards the presenter, and I will ask those questions at the conclusion of their presentation. And so let's hear from Aubrie Uson, representing the University of Guam. She will be talking about environmental awareness and behaviors of University of Guam students. And so whenever you're ready, Aubrie.
All right. So Afade, my name is Aubrie Uson. I am a Build EXITO scholar, and I'll be presenting environmental awareness and behaviors of University of Guam students. This research project was actually part of SO 203, which is Intro to Quantitative and Qualitative Research Methods. And it was a gateway course for Build EXITO, which is the research program I am a part of. Next slide, please. So before we begin, we should understand first what environmental awareness and behaviors are. So environmental awareness is defined as the ability to understand how our behaviors impact our environment and committing to make changes to our activities to protect the planet. As for environmental behaviors, they refer to behaviors which individuals take action for the protection and safety of the environment. Next slide, please. And the goal of this research was really to assess the environmental awareness and behaviors of University of Guam students and to determine if their awareness and behaviors are associated with what they major or specialize in. And it's also to help support the value, belief, norm theory, which was created by Paul C. Stern. And this theory is basically saying that individuals or a group of individuals, if they have environmental values, they're more likely to practice those pro-environmental behaviors. Next slide, please. And my apologies, I'm not too sure why the letters look like that, but my thesis for this research was that environmental awareness and behaviors of University of Guam students is not dependent on their major or specialization, or in other words, it doesn't matter what their major is, all UOG students have this certain level of awareness and practice behaviors. And my first hypothesis is that UOG students pursuing a degree associated with the environment possess environmental awareness and practice those behaviors. And my second hypothesis is that UOG students pursuing a degree that is not associated with the environment, they still possess those environmental awareness and values and practice those behaviors. Next slide. As for my methods of data collection, there were two parts. There was a qualitative side and a quantitative side. As for the qualitative side, it was a semi-standardized interview which comprised of 10 questions. I interviewed two students. One was a criminal justice major, so a non-environmental major, and an agriculture and natural resources major, who was the environmental major. As for the quantitative research, we did empirical surveys, and there was a total of 28 UOG students who participated, all between the ages of 19 and 25. 16 of the 28 were non-environmental majors, and the 12 were environmental majors. As for the sample design, it was non-probability sampling and convenience sampling, since my target audience was only UOG students. Okay, next slide, please. My techniques for data analysis, I used the statistical packages for social sciences, or also known as SPSS. My independent variable was the environmental awareness and behaviors, and my dependent variable was, of course, their major, environmental or non-environmental. Next slide. So we're going to start with the qualitative side of the results or the interview results. And as I said before, one was a criminal justice major and the other was an agriculture and natural resources major. They were both females and both between the ages of 19 and 25. For the interview results, I did a compare and contrast between the two interviewees, and I'm going to start with the similarities. So they both had a very good understanding of the environmental issues occurring throughout the world. They both agree that our actions can affect the well-being of our local and global environments. And they do practice environmental behaviors such as saving water and energy. Next slide. As for their differences, I did notice that my AL major or agriculture major, she not only listed the environmental issues that she knows is occurring throughout the world, but she also really went in depth and she explained what is causing them and how it is impacting us. She also takes part in environmental friendly activities at least weekly or bi-weekly. As for my criminal justice major, she mostly just listed down the issues, but she didn't really explain what is causing them. And she also doesn't find herself talking or speaking about the importance of the environment often. Next slide. Okay, now we're moving on to data analysis. And for data analysis, I chose two themes. So the first theme was awareness and attitudes, and the second one had to do with behaviors. But for theme one, the first question is, are UOG students aware of the multiple environmental issues occurring throughout the world? And if you look at the bar chart on the bottom, the statement reads, climate change, deforestation, droughts, floods, global warming, water scarcity, and pollution are increasing challenges that our world is facing. And as you can see from the bar chart, all students or all participants, all students from both majors strongly agreed with this statement. So it answers yes to the question that UOG students, or at least the ones that participated in this survey, are aware of those environmental issues occurring throughout the world. Okay, next slide. And the second statement for this question, which you can find at the bottom of the bar chart, is environmental degradation is detrimental and can jeopardize the long-term health and security of animals, plants, and humans. So in the previous statement, I'm asking them if they are aware of the different issues around the world. But in this statement, it's asking them if they are aware that those issues can have an impact on us. And looking at the bar chart, none of the participants disagreed with the statement. They either agreed or strongly disagreed. So it answers yes to both questions, that they are aware of those issues and they do understand that those issues can have a bad effect on our health. Next slide. Okay, so the next question for theme one is, what is their willingness to practice certain environmental behaviors? And the first statement for this question is, I am willing to restrict the use of appliances such as TVs or air conditioning to save energy. So it's asking them how willing are they to save energy. And just like the previous slide, no one disagreed with this statement. As you can see from the bar chart, they either agreed or strongly agreed with this statement, which answers yes to the question that they are very willing to practice environmental behaviors involving energy use. Next slide. The second statement for this question is, I am willing to reduce the consumption of unnecessary products and packaging of difficult degradation. And it's just like the previous slides before. They either agreed or strongly agreed with this statement, which answers yes, that these UOG students are willing to practice environmental behaviors when it comes to consuming unnecessary products. Next slide. Okay, so the next statement for this question is, I am willing to use a bike or take the bus to go to the university to reduce air pollution. As you can see from the bar chart, there's a big shift compared to the previous ones because majority of the participants were neutral with the statement and some of them actually disagreed. And if we look at the table on the left, in the row for neutral and the count, there was a total of 17, which made up the majority of the participants. 11 of the 17 were non-environmental, while 6 of them were environmental students. As for disagreed, there was a total of 4, and 3 of the 4 were non-environmental students, and 1 of them was environmental. And although the data does show that they are not as willing to practice environmental behaviors when it comes to transportation, I would say that it doesn't have much to do with their values, but other factors such as safety and weather, because first of all, Guam is very hot. And if you look at our roads, they are not in the best condition, especially the roads leading to UOG. They're not exactly bike or walk friendly. So I think at least when it comes to transportation, it doesn't really have much to do with their values, because I think if the conditions were different, we would see different results. They would be more willing. Next slide. Okay, now we're moving on to theme 2, which has to do with behaviors. And the first question is, how often do UOG students take part in activities that improve environmental quality? And if we look at the table on the left in the row for sometimes, there was a total of 17, which made up the majority of the participants. Of the 17, 12 of them were the non-environmental students, while 5 of them were environmental. As for often, meaning that they often take part in these activities, there was a total of 11, and the majority of them were environmental students, while the 4 were non-environmental. Next slide. So this behavior has to do with transportation. So how often do UOG students practice environmental friendly transportation? And if you look at the bar chart, majority of the participants say that they never practice eco-friendly transportation. And looking at the table on the left for never, there was a total of 16, which was half of the participants. And 10 of the 16 were non-environmental students, and the other 6 were environmental students. As for sometimes and rarely, it's pretty even for both majors. So 2 students for both majors said that they sometimes do it, while 4 students in both majors rarely do it. Next slide. So this next behavior has to do with the consumption of products. So how often do UOG students practice responsible and environmental friendly consumption of products? And this is almost like the previous slide. So for often and always, it's pretty even, or it's even. 4 students from both majors often do this. For sometimes 6 students from both majors sometimes do it. And as for rarely, there was a total of 8, and 6 of the 8 were non-environmental and 2 of them were environmental. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next behavior has to do with saving water. So how often do UOG students practice saving water? But looking at the bar chart, we can see that they often and sometimes do this. So 17 voted for sometimes, and of the 17, 11 were non-environmental and 6 of them were environmental. And the other 11 voted for sometimes. Okay, next slide, please. And this one also has to do with saving energy. So how often do UOG students practice saving energy? Majority of the participants voted for always doing this, while only 8 of them voted for often. Okay, next slide. So in conclusion, UOG students do possess environmental awareness and behaviors. Environmental majors are more likely to practice pro behaviors. So in a way, my thesis was proven wrong because both majors, they have a certain environmental attitudes and values, but when it comes to putting it into practice, you'll see that environmental majors are more likely to do so. And when it comes to transportation, both majors are less likely to practice those behaviors. But like I said before, I don't think it has to do with their values. I think it really has to do with the conditions such as safety and Guam's hot weather. Okay, as for future research, I would include other factors such as gender, ethnicity, academic status, etc., and not just their major. But if someone were to still continue doing the majors, I would focus on specific ones, for example, business versus chemistry majors. Okay, next slide. Thank you.
Great job, Aubrey. Let's all give a round of applause there with emojis, or if our camera is on. Excellent work. Thank you for staying within that time. I realize that if there is a gap here, then maybe we might want to go to another full panel and then come back at 3 o'clock when we resume here in this track. Are there any questions for Aubrey or comments?
I have a
question. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Dr. Ames.
Oh, thank you. A good presentation, Aubrey. And you did a very good paper in that, the 203 class, right? I have one question for you. In your conclusions, you said that both majors had the attitudes and have environmental attitudes and environmental values. But then when it shifted to behaviors, it was only your environmental majors that were actually practicing environmentally friendly behaviors. Why do you think that is?
I think that has to do with well, of course, they're environmental majors, so I think they have a better understanding of why they should practice those behaviors. And also, because it is their major, they're more likely to partake in those activities because it's in their career path.
Okay, so you're linking it then to their majors, that they are environmental majors. Okay, good, thank you.
I just want to say really good presentation. Thank you for this insight. And, I also teach environmental art, and I can relate to what you were speaking because indeed, it brings some and develops some awareness with students who learn about environmental issues, and also that affects how they would respond or react. So I think, but very interesting, it was nice to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very interesting. A couple things come to my mind, and I'll try to frame this as a question at the end. But one thing is I think about college students, and I think about how university life either kind of gives us a pass to do certain practices that we don't kind of do our entire life, stay up late and cram and eat cheap and bad food. Oftentimes we are forced to carpool and do things that might lower our carbon footprint, for example. And so I thought about these as this kind of moment in life when we have these certain habits as a student of the university. At the same time, I'm kind of interested in your giving people the pass and saying that if conditions were different, if the roads were better, if there were bike lanes, because this is something that I deal with on the island, and totally, it's hot. We're very little public transportation. It's almost dangerous on the road. At the same time, some of the most bicycle with the largest cities with the largest bicycle populations in Minnesota and Bogota, Colombia, for example, are very difficult to ride through, but people still go out and perform these tasks. And so I'm just kind of curious about that line that you have when you say if things were different, when the study is really about our attitudes. And so just kind of, if you want to just touch on that a little bit, how might we go about kind of changing attitudes? And then maybe, hopefully, the environmental road conditions might change because of those attitudes. Any feelings?
Good point, Hunter.
I think that, well, I think it has to do with awareness. They just have to, or maybe understand more that, I guess, environmental friendly transportation will help. And maybe if that awareness grows, then it can, not too sure how to answer that actually.
No, I think you're definitely on the right track as we produce awareness campaigns. And I think studies like this and asking those questions are a part of an awareness campaign. And so as you do that, attitudes start to change. As attitudes start to change, and then we start to see kind of infrastructural conditions change. And so, yeah, I think you were on the right track to answering that question.
Oh, someone actually has a question in the chat.
I'll ask this. How do you think environmental majors like you can help non-environmental majors to match their environmental awareness to their behavior?
Well, I think maybe through our social media outlets, for one. And there are different clubs such as Guam Green Growth Community and the Agricultural and Life Sciences Club. And I think with those clubs, I think maybe just spread more awareness around the school, and of course through our social media outlets and maybe the UOG website. I mean, and if they have classmates, I guess just to let them know.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. Another part of, I think, the awareness campaigns. Another question here. Do you think you would get a different result if you had undergrad and grad students in your research?
I think I would actually, because all the participants were undergraduate and none of them were grad students. So I think I would, because I would say that grad students have more likely a better understanding.
Do you think that these, since we're asking hypothetical questions, do you think that your findings with UOG students might be different from the general population on the island?
I would say, oh, sorry, can you repeat that? Can you repeat the question?
And the same question, except not with undergrads and grad students, but with undergraduates and the general population on the island. If you were to run this study with the general population, do you think that the findings would be different or similar?
I think they would be probably similar.
Yeah, I think I was leaning in that direction as well. Once again, let's give a round of applause for Aubrie Uson. Great job. Good luck furthering your academic career here. And so excellent job. And so we do have Lydio Fulo with life satisfaction and its effects on academic self-efficacy on the University of Guam student population is unfortunately not here to make their presentation. And so instead of just sitting here or filling in this time with some sort of banter or conversation, it's probably best Irena, tell me if you feel any differently, for us to go to another panel if we can, and then come back at 3 p.m. for Dr. Irena Keckes' presentation from traditional mokuhanga to contemporary printmaking. That will start at 3 p.m. Then we'll go to 3:30 with the last panel, which will be a very interesting arts-based panel starting at 3:30.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the continuation of our afternoon panels here in track number 3. Hopefully your conference is going well. I'd like to welcome Dr. Irena Keckes here to present her 20-minute presentation from traditional mokuhanga to contemporary printmaking. We'll have about 20 minutes followed by a 5-minute question and answer phase for this wonderful panel presentation. Whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Hunter. I can start with my presentation. So today I'm going to talk about printmaking and show some examples of my work that I produced in a traditional Japanese water-based printmaking method, and some of my more recent print installations and art objects and artist books. Okay, so right here. So I'm going to talk about my practice, its transformation from from using centuries-old method of water-based multicolored woodblock printmaking towards more contemporary print media installations, sculpture prints, experimental methods in relief printmaking. So it's about fusion of traditional contemporary relief printmaking methods, outcomes, concepts. So I'll begin with Japanese woodblock printmaking, mokuhanga, using suming as well as color pigments, using all natural organic materials and hand printing. Then I moved to talk about objects, artist books, sewn woodcut prints and print installations. So as printmakers and artists, we all approach themes and develop our concepts from our different perspectives and from our unique experiences as artists. My artistic research revolves around print media, in particular woodcut, a method that has been one of the oldest traditional forms of printmaking, dating back to the 2nd century, progressing over centuries in incredible variety of ways. Nevertheless, woodcut printmaking limitlessly persists and extensively utilize contemporary art form. It clearly demonstrates how using traditional solutions and or methods while addressing modern issues and contemporary times is a never-ending story. So in this illustrative talk, I'll introduce works that best speak of my previous and recent research through printmaking, modes of installation, concepts, folding, intersecting, and sewing of unique and multifaceted prints. So I'm going to talk about several of my works. First, life cycle prints using traditional mokuhanga method produced in Japan and South Korea in early 2000s. Unlimited resonance of repetition and mindful repetition, dialogue and invocation installation, and then printed book art, printed objects, print experiments, and lastly, collaborative print installations, bonding and beads. And then also I'm going to talk briefly about print installation, Daydream Immensity, and my last installation, River, and medical ropes prints that I showed in Fine Arts Faculty Biennial recently. All right. So in this first slide, you can see some of my older works that I produced while I lived in Tokyo, Japan, and studied at Tokyo University of the Arts, where I learned Japanese woodblock printmaking. These are old, the monochrome ones are all printed in sumi ink, and the colored one using pigments. I called this work Time, and that was my master's graduation work. These are some prints as well using Japanese woodblock printmaking method, water-based. And it's all hand printed using Japanese printmaking tools such as baran, made of bamboo coil and wrapped in bamboo sheets. So really all natural and non-toxic and environmentally friendly materials. And I used to print on handmade Japanese papers, such as pure kozo paper, and I particularly liked Japanese handmade paper called tosawashi. All right, so these are some prints on this slide that I produced really before, some 22 years ago. So these are also all Japanese prints using mokuhanga method, and some of my first print installations in this first slide. And here where you see flags, these are really my first prints on fabric that were exhibited as an installation outside, and like flags, also printed all by hand. Here I used also sumi ink printed on Japanese soji screens, paper that is used for sliding doors, and some paper that is used for calligraphy as well and comes in rolls. Also all hand printed. That time I lived in New Zealand and was already doing my PhD there. And then I moved towards Western printmaking again, and I used BFK paper, which is really good paper for relief printmaking, and used press. And I carved really large blocks and then assembled them in a larger print. And here are some examples of these prints. And this work is called Mindful Repetitions. That was my final work as a PhD candidate at that time. Also woodcut prints printed on BFK Reeves paper using press and installed to go around the gallery. I showed this work at Isla Center for the Arts in 2015. This work is called Dialogue and Evocations. It's a print installation. It's Foguang Shan Buddhist Temple in Auckland, New Zealand. That was my last exhibition in New Zealand. And inside the Buddhist temple, they had a really nice big gallery. And I showed my carved wood and prints on the wall. All right, so now I'm moving towards more recent work that I created here. This one is called Daydream Intimate Immensity, woodcut print on cotton in Isla Center for the Arts. So this work is very colored print installation of variable dimensions created in 2019, exhibited as a floor installation in Isla Center for the Arts. This installation is based on research into French philosopher Gaston Bachelard's phenomenological study of the intimate values of the inside space, the poetics of space, discussing the significance of the house as the space where thoughts, memories, and dreams assimilate. Bachelard suggests that the daydream is the principle of that integration. According to Bachelard, the daydream transmits the dreamer from the immediate world to a space or a world that is infinite, intimate space, and outside world merged through immensity. Further, our perception of immensity is more the result of an inner immensity than the external one. It's more self-contemplation, a vastness of thought, which has meditative quality. It is this inner immensity that gives a meaning to expressions of the visible external world. So the work has no frames, no glass, no barriers, apart from tangible solidity of walls. A space defined by light and ambience is dynamic and fluid. Forms and textures emerge from such settings, floating as in a dream. Notions of variability, fluidity, abstractness, and spirituality that this installation embraces merge to create a magical space of intimate immensity. This floor installation consists of 2 large cotton sheets, 6 pillowcases, and 1 tablecloth. And yeah, all is printed on fabric. Right, so these are some close-ups. All right, so I'm moving now to talk about collaborative work called Bonding. This is the first collaborative print installation that I created with the Polish artist Katarina Zimna. So the Bonding project print installation is also variable dimensions, is the first outcome of the collective we created, we formed. We called it Femigraphic because we're 2 female printmakers, and we explored the themes of feminism. So celebrated the idea of women's solidarity and need to come together and support each other. Each artist brings her own individual story and artistic vocabularies through which we encounter. The complete work might be read as a dialogue. The subject touches include personal narrative of what it means to be a female through its diverse multiple roles. It also explores even how printmaking may interconnect with performance, installation, and intersect even with socially relevant themes and practice. So we encountered through a common interest in expanded forms of print and print installation for both of us, for Katarina Zimna and myself. Printmaking is primarily a process of constructing and formulating ideas, and all stages of this process are meaningful for us as artists. It involves playing and experimenting with diverse notions and methods. Specifically, we intend to reconnoiter feminine or feminist concept in relation to and through our printmaking practice. Both of us included a performative element into our work, used scraps of printed fabric to create a large-scale print installation. So as this slide to the right shows, we were literally sewing the prints inside the gallery and then installed it well, to the left one, this one is in Isla, because later on I show that in Isla as well. But this one is part of Impact Printmaking Conference in 2018 in Cantabria, Santander, Spain. The ceiling is much higher, so the installation looked quite different, and different color of the walls and floors, so it all contributes to the different feeling and experiencing the work. All right, so I'm gonna go through. These are some close-ups. And here I really experimented with, this is here in Fine Arts Building at UOG at the back. There's the terrace, and I just hanged it down from the terrace and try, and then on the floor, and sort of wrap it and try to experiment how would it look if I exhibit outdoors or in different sort of contexts, how would that change meaning? So I kind of really liked experimenting with that. All right, so next I'm going to talk about Project Beads. That's the second collaborative project of Femigraphic Collective, Katerina Zimna and myself, Irena Keckes. So, you know how we worked. This was produced totally in time of lockdown and COVID. So we were I printed first, then I mailed the prints to Poland to her, then she printed, she mailed back to me, then I was sewing them together using my sewing machine, and then installed in Isla just to take pictures, and that was exhibited in Hong Kong at the Impact 11 Printmaking Conference last year, which was entirely online conference. We live in distant places, Guam and Poland. We communicate through internet, send our works back and forth by mail. But this collaborative process, we cross boundaries, not just geographical, but the boundaries of the medium of printmaking as well, especially in reference to the idea of ownership, and mitigates the very idea of editioning the prints incorporated in large-scale spatial print installations. In Beads project, the multiple versions of the same print refer to the various meanings and emotions that are encoded in the concept of beads, collaborative work, and the strategy of multiplication and variation emphasizes the democratic aspect of printmaking, integral to both artists' practices. So, you know, we use the inspiration. So the beads can carry various messages and refer to various categories of culture, identity, sexuality, power, politics, religion, that are innocent, mute. They're also innocent and mute objects until they are filled with meaning by the wearer. The beads we present refer to the ideas of togetherness, women's solidarity, and strength, and are inspired by traditional red beads necklaces, popular in Eastern Europe. So I'm just going to go through some slides how the installation looked like when I tested it in Isla Center for the Arts, and take pictures and video, and then we presented it at the conference in Hong Kong. So I think I need to speed up a little bit. All right, so next I'm going to talk about river prints in thin fabric that I presented at the last Fine Arts Faculty Biennial in Isla Center for the Arts. That was from December 21 to end of January this year. So print installation river contemplate the specific contemporary times we live in. So this is how it looked like. And I really contemplated those past 2 years that we lived through, pandemic, and how our life changed so much through all these experiences and soul searching. That was kind of like a really good piece of time when we were alone, at least for myself. Prints in this series are introspective, self-reflective, meditative, and pondering on space of liminality as a state of transition between one stage, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and expressively, as a feeling and process of transitioning across boundaries of artistic awareness. In this series, I also printed medical robes. I don't know how about other faculty in other schools, but because I teach fine arts and some, for instance, printmaking is very difficult to teach online. So sometimes we were meeting, that's my only class, I was meeting face to face, and I got medical robes, and instead of just drawing them, I decided to print on them and to use them as a symbol, as a narrative, or as a statement of one time. And so, all right, so that's the river. It's a 14 meters long print on very thin fabric, and I printed it all by hand. I use Calico Safe Wash Relief printmaking inks that are non-toxic, or perhaps more correct is to say less toxic. And I just printed everything on the floor. It was like one very, very long roll of linoleum. So I carved that, and then I printed. And then I printed two 14 meters long prints, and these are the medical robes. I printed some of my older woodcuts mixed with the newer line of cuts, and I also printed gloves because in printmaking we use gloves so we get lots of ink on our hands, and then sometimes it's difficult to wash all the time. So just to protect a little bit. So and then instead of throwing them to trash, I just use them. I printed them. They create really interesting texture. So these are some of the works river while I was drawing them in the studio, and some of the medical robes while I was drawing them around. But I printed those gloves and some prints, some woodcuts and lino cuts. So I'm going to briefly talk about our artist books, just go quickly through it, because artist books and objects, this my relatively new experiment. I'd say, well, it started in 2020 when we went to lockdowns, and I couldn't really go to my studio and do so. I had many prints that I didn't know what to do, like test prints, and I just started folding them and sewing them using different color of thread, which, you know, color will symbolize something. And so, and then it was, yeah, very, very creative time in midst of all this. So I'll show you several books. One is called Everything is Relative and a Sea Change. So just profound self-transformation. Each of us experiences at some point in our lives. These prints exemplify a form of resilience and creativity. To celebrate life, imagination, challenging self as an artist, as a human being, accepting imperfections and flaws, taking artistic risks with combining print into new and altered forms, reinventing, changing perspectives. So prints in cycle essentially are exploratory. Sewing threads became an integral part of artist books as palpable, perceptible, thoughtfully constructed objects. So this one I created for the exhibition. I sent to one project called Love and Music, inspired by music. It was exhibited in Russia in 2020. I used just red thread, and I deliberately left some of the threads hanging out to become part of that artwork. So I'm just gonna quickly stroll through this print. So this one I sent to Ford Graphic Art Biennial Czech Serbia in 2020, where I also served as a juror for academic papers. It was really interesting to look at, but here I use again different color threads, and there is more black on these prints, and I thought like some lighter orange thread would look very good. This one I showed in Mexico. I just folded prints again, sewing them together, trying different things, just really playing, experimenting. This one is Everything is Relative. Prints on very thin, transparent paper. Actually, it's tracing paper. But I really wanted to play and try how it looks when they overlap. And again, using red thread. And this one is Sea Change. Also on very thin, transparent paper. Thank you for your time and attention, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Great job, Dr. Keckes. Beautiful artwork here, wonderful rationales and logic behind the artwork. It's always so interesting to me to hear the artist's rationale and then think about how me as a viewer responds. We only have about 2 minutes. Are there any questions from the audience for our presenter or comments? I always have a question. Yeah, well, how do you feel about that kind of very just general dynamic between the rationale? I thought that was just so interesting to hear about your process and what you intended to get across in the making. But the kind of general negotiation of your process and then the reading of the artwork by audiences.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always interesting. I'm always curious how people feel or understand or can relate, or how they, because most of my artwork is interactive, especially those the installations where the audience is invited to enter physically and experience with their bodies and with their minds, and everybody relates in a different way, I guess. Also depends what they carry inside. But I'm curious always to hear how they experience my work, although every time I try to explain my work, but I guess I really want to leave lots into that interaction and their own personal experience of an artwork.
Nice, thank you. Great response to that somewhat open-ended question. And so another round of applause. Right. Excellent job. We are right at 3:30 now, and I believe we are all in the right
I just
space.
want to, sorry to interrupt. I just want to invite everyone present to visit Isla Center for the Arts, because there is one really interesting and extensive exhibition of retrospectives of different artists related to Guam and University of Guam. So please come and see, it's open already. Thank you. Thank you, Hunter.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely support Island Wisdom, support research on the region, and support artists on the island.